we're still in high gear for the Global Days of Action on Tax Justice, and we're still advancing the campaign demands, where we were looking at having progressive taxation for gender transformative social organization of care, the incorporation of gender transformative provisions into the UN Tax Convention, and the increase of public investment in care public systems, and the need to acknowledge and value unpaid care work in economic systems, as well as ensure gender equality in tax systems and public services. As we all might be aware, the Global Days of Action this year were coinciding with the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. And one of the things that we're looking at in this webinar is taking stock of tax justice 30 years since the Beijing Declaration. We have a 1-hour webinar, and for those who might need interpretation, I will be able to alert you. Okay, we have interpretation for French, so please look out for the interpretation tab. It's under more, and then you can select in case you want French interpretation. And then for introductions, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And in case you have any questions or comments, we will be taking those later after all the speakers have spoken, but you may feel free to post them in the chat as well. And then, so our discussion today will be centered around 3 themes. The first on the gendered impacts of taxation, the second around the global tax reforms and gender equality, and the last on the social organization of care and tax justice. And to take us through the discussion today, we have 3 distinguished speakers. The first one is Azeezat Adekanye, who is a feminist researcher specializing in gender, labor studies, and political economy. She has over 4 years experience working with universities and leading youth-focused advocacy programs. We also have Dr. Khanyisile Litchfield-Tshabalala, who is a retired rear admiral and a facilitator and consultant specializing in illicit financial flows, tax, and social accountability. And she has a deep commitment to Africa and a passion evident to all who have worked with her. And lastly, we have Tendai Miti, who is a feminist activist and executive director of Sistah Foundation in Zambia. And she's working towards advocating for economic justice through a feminist lens. She champions gender responsive policies and feminist economics to dismantle systemic barriers and uplift marginalized communities. And she is an alumna of FEMNET's Africa Feminist Macroeconomics Academy. And so to kickstart the conversation, I'll quickly turn to Azeezat. And Azeezat will be sharing with us about the progress that we've had so far as we mark 30 years since the Beijing Declaration. And Azeezat, would you please share with us some of the progress that has been made towards achieving women's economic justice, and specifically focusing on tax justice? What barriers still exist, and what barriers still exist that are within tax justice that are hindering women's access to economic justice? Azeezat, over to you.
Thank you very much, Grace. Thank you so much. Really, really grateful for this opportunity. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Okay, now it's loading. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So today, I know that we're discussing something very important, tax justice, economic justice. And while I was preparing my presentation, I thought where would be a good place to start from. And I look at this very image, And a lot of us here were familiar with what happened last year in Kenya, Reject Finance Bill. Why, the finance bill that happened in Kenya last year, there were lots and lots of things around that. There was a huge blown protest, followed by the End Femicide in Kenya protest. There was just like a lot going on. And I just want us to take a moment to digest what this means to us as Africans, as people in the global south, and as women, to just know that it's not just that we're talking about it, but these are like real, like realities, things that happen to us on daily basis and have serious implications for our well-being. So when we speak of Beijing 30, everybody's also like quite familiar with the areas that, the Beijing 30, Beijing platform, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We have women and poverty, education and training of women, women and health, violence against women, women and armed conflict, women and the economy, women in power and decision-making, institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women, human rights and women, women and the media, women and the environment. So those are like the bold, steps for the BPFA. So I also looked at it, and then according to Moshin, says the BPFA was one of the milestones targeted as setting the groundwork for advocating the rights of women and challenging the established gender norms. And is like one of those international protocols since the end of the Cold War that's pushed countries to take active measures for the increase of women's access to decision-making positions, education, healthcare, and advancing gender equality reforms. But with Beijing at 30, it remains questionable whether women have indeed achieved economic justice through tax policies. Because my previous slide was speaking of, women and health, advancement of women's rights, women in politics, women in leadership. But at the same time, we're looking at economic justice. There's a lot of things going on, far rights movements, anti-right movement, the global gag growth, funding cuts for feminist movement. And then it is very important for us to have all of these conversations at this point. Now, the big question is, are we progressing or regressing? Now, I looked at some of the big social movements that have happened in the last couple of years. I looked at Reject Finance Bill 2024, End Femicide in Kenya. I stand with Senator Natasha. This is one that is currently going on in Nigeria. Senator Natasha is a senator at the Federal Republic of Nigeria. She dropped a petition with the Senate accusing the Senate president of sexual harassment. But in turn, the Senate Ethics and Disciplinary Committee never really reviewed that petition. But now she's on suspension for 6 months from the Senate. Now, we also have the Supreme Court in the United States overturning Roe v. Wade. South Korea government pledged to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. So the big question is, are we progressing? Are we moving forward? Or are we regressing? That's the big question that we need to ask ourselves. Because when you look at the current realities these days, you begin to ask, why does it even look like women in the 80s, in the 90s have more rights than I do at this time? Why is it that, it looks like the efforts that our mothers have done, the work that they've done is just being pushed down under the drain, like now. So, and that is why it is important for us to talk. So there's a lot of progress. I mean, women are now in work. There's so much going on. But I'm going to show you, in the next couple of my slides, what I focused on. So now, if we say we're taking stock, I say despite the bold promises of the BPFA, women all over the world, we still face significant barriers in achieving economic justice. And why? Is because patriarchy and capitalism continues to be a huge bane to achieving economic justice. Like I said before, there is a lot of improvements. Women are now in work. Women are, any more steps in leaderships. They are moving forward in their careers. The economy is thriving. There's a lot of that going on. Oh, women have like this number of seats in the assembly. There are Black women in political offices and all of that. But if we sit back to take stock, the question that again has is, are we progressing or regressing? So Professor Sylvia Tamale argued that, patriarchy views women in terms of domesticity. And, other works have shown that capitalism continues to thrive on unpaid care work carried by women, which I know is still going to be discussed by one of our speakers here today. The economy is sustained through unpaid care work by keeping a dominant male force underpaid, and the woman continues to bear the burden of care. Now we look at fiscal policies. Here, in the world today, they are shaped under the politics of exclusion. Monetary and fiscal policies are based on revenues that are made from productive work. And the care economy is just relegated. And every year, women spend billions of hours doing unpaid care work. And they do this under the pretense that it is not dependent on women's unpaid care work and reproductive work, without which the capitalist system would crumble. So if women are not doing this, that particular capitalist system would crumble. But they are focusing on the productive work because what they see that what women do is termed as unproductive. Yet, these fiscal policies continue to affect women. When government debt rises due to all these policies that are not inclusive, that exclude women, austerity measures begin. And that is what is evident in Kenya's finance bill last year. And women are the ones who bear the brunt of this. And while patriarchy has strongly determined what is private and public, there is no gainsaying that it also continues to determine what happens in private. So we look at how taxation has progressed, and we see that even in some countries, they still jointly tax families. And all of this shows that the woman, what patriarchy does is there's one person who is a breadwinner, there's another person who is the homemaker. So Andrienko says that he argues against, the procedure of jointly taxing families because you put some persons as second-class citizens or properties like that you still need to own. So you discriminate them because they are second earners. And that's the kind of progress that we're talking about. So when we still talk of taking stock, now I look at the statistics, the figures. Women are direly underrepresented in the tax policy and the tax administration space. And I also find this very ridiculous, but also not ridiculous at the same time, because when it comes to economy, when it comes to money, when it comes to finance, they're also seen as things that are not in the domain of private. It is in the public domain. It is what men do. They are the ones who should only have access to that. So when you don't have, women in those kind of spaces, it becomes very problematic for us to even say we want to theorize, or we want to research, or we want to even make policies that positively impact women. Around the world, less than 15% of finance ministers are women. Now, I said it the other time that, following the Beijing Platform for Action and Declaration and all of that, a lot has happened. Women are in work. It looks like, gender equality has progressed. People are working, women are working, they earn money, they do all of this and that. But according to the International Labour Organization, only 42% of women are still part of the workforce compared to 72% for men. And according to the UN Women, 1 in every 10 women is living in extreme poverty. That's 10% of the global women population. And also, according to the ILO, 73% of women in wage employment across the globe do not have access to social protection. And according to the World Bank, more than 2.7 billion women across the world are restricted by law from having the same choice of jobs as men. And according to the ILO again, almost 60% of women's employment across the globe is in the informal economy. Now, this same informal economy that is regarded as, unproductive, that is not, we don't really pay attention into it because informal economy pays less. Right. So if we are saying that women are in work, women, as opposed to what was happening before the BPFA and all of that women are now in works, they are jobs, they are earning money, they are in politics, their voices are being heard. It then begs the question, what kind of jobs are they in? What kind of policies are being made for them? What kind of policies are being made for them? Are they inclusive? Do they really work? Or we continue to just push the agenda that women are in work when at the end of the day, the barrier is still not broken. There is still economic injustice, because if you say we are in work, but we don't have access to social protection, we're still living in extreme poverty. 42% of women are the only part of the workforce. So what exactly are we doing? Women are represented in low-wage jobs and informal employment. And what this means is that unequal tax burdens have pushed more women into financial insecurity and poverty. Now, we are not only just talking of, we're not just in low-wage job, but tax burdens, because the same taxation would be on both men and women. Now, the tax is not, is not like proportionate, because when you tax everybody the same way, both people are in low-wage jobs, high-wage jobs, it pushes more women into extreme poverty. The question again is, what kind of jobs are women doing? Pink tariffs continue to be a concept, as services that are meant to be free even continues to get taxed higher. Now, when things like sanitary pads are taxed higher, it gets more expensive, pushes more women into period poverty. Regressive tax system also affect women disproportionately in the global south, given neocolonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, and it often profits from women's stress and oppression. And this contributes to neighbor inequality that already exists and contributes nothing to the BPFA, especially in the critical areas. So women are more likely to be in informal employment. Now, this means that they pay indirect taxes, but they also lack access to tax benefits, social security, and pension schemes. Because if you are in informal employment, your employer is not definitely putting up pension for you. They're not doing like all of those HMO, health plans or anything for you. They're not doing them for you, but you are paying taxes, but you also lack access to the taxes that you're paying. So you're paying your VAT, you're probably paying your WHT withholding tax and all. So we see that this gap continues to widen. So if you are saying that, we're taking stock, we have to look at all of this issue critically. Now, I saved this for the last. Tax avoidance and evasion by big corporations and the wealthy. They reduce government revenues. Now, it limits the funds available for public services, and it disproportionately benefits women and marginalized group. You see big companies, big technologies, not only are they exploiting women, not only are they exploiting workers, not only are they thriving on the unpaid care work, reproductive work that women do and they carry out. Not only are they underpaying them, not only are those things unpaid or recognized as unproductive, contributes nothing to fiscal and monetary policies, just like a whole economy just separated aside. But when it also comes to tax evasion, they're also doing it. They're not paying taxes, and then government has nothing to do, and it directly, not even indirectly, directly impacts the quality of lives that men live. Of course, we already that women live. So now we're saying that they go to, most of them are represented in informal employment. They don't have access to tax benefits, but they also pay taxes. So how do we then, bridge the gap between that? So government should increase direct taxation. There should be like a progressive tax system on wealthy and high income persons. And they should implement gender responsive budgeting. And that helps us when we have more women in leadership, more women in finance, more women in tax administrations. We employ a gender responsive budgeting and formalize informal labor and ensure fair taxation for women. So if they are not enjoying tax benefits, why should you tax them that higher? And we should recognize how all of these issues are intersectional, and as feminists, and approach our work with the same lens There are lots of other marginalized groups, women who are living in rural areas, women who are lesbians, bisexuals, you know, they are gays, the LGBT community, the trans women. Let us come together and be intersectional in our approach to know that all of these issues impact all of us. So if we say we're taking stock, this is where I'm at, and I'm going to stop here and leave it to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Azeezat, for that, and for especially pointing out the fact that tax avoidance and evasion have continued to disproportionately impact women and other marginalized groups. So I'll quickly move to Honorable Tshabalala, who will be speaking to us today about tax evasion and avoidance by corporations and the wealthy, and how this exacerbates the economic disparities for women and the other marginalized groups. And of course, recognizing that because Global South countries have been heavily affected by tax avoidance and evasion, they then run towards reliance on regressive taxes like VAT. And so Honorable Tshabalala will also be sharing with us how governments can shift towards more progressive tax systems that benefit women, and what policy measures can be introduced to make taxation more progressive and gender transformative. Over to you, Honorable Tshabalala.
Thank you very much. Allow me to keep my video off because it's raining cats and dogs here. I was actually playing Wi-Fi hunting within the house, finding the best spot as the first presenter was speaking, and I think it's more stable where I am. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for everybody who has tuned in. I think I want to start by saying that when the Beijing conference was held, we had not had the high-level panel report on illicit financial flows that was commissioned through United Nations Economic Commission on Africa, UNECA, chaired by the former President Thabo Mbeki, and with a conglomerate of experts in accounting, law, and other economics and other fields from at least, you know, I would say a score of African countries. So it was a really multi-representative team. We hadn't had that report, and I'm citing it because it's very important for us to understand that although illicit financial flows by their nature have been going on since colonialism, because they are inseparable with imperialism, really, which is a capitalism of neoliberalism and transnational cooperations, where money itself has become a commodity. It's no longer a means to a transaction. It has become a commodity on its own. So that report hadn't come out, and that was the first time illicit financial flows were really quantified in Africa, and they couldn't go back to colonialism. They only did the period between 1980 and 2008, 2009, but we like a round figure, so we always say 2010. And that report found that in that period of 30 years, we had lost an estimate of $1.5 US trillion. And when I say we, I talk about us. I don't know if I should call us Black Africa. I hate the word black because none of us are black. We are brown people. But anyway, for the sake of separating North Africa from us, that estimate was really just for sub-Saharan Africa, or what you would call Black Africa. And I think the breakdown of that is what became very scary for most of us. I remember I was sitting in a tax justice network when I was still an EFF MP at the time. The report had just come out, and Tafatswa was working for Afrodat then and was presenting this report. We were about 5 countries, I think, from 5 MPs from 5 countries. And he asked us, of this $1.5 US trillion, how much do you think is direct African government theft? And there was no statistic, it was less than 70, 80%. I think there was even one that went to 90. And then he promptly told us, I'm sorry to put your bubble, only 5% is direct African government corruption, 30% is criminal activity, which we shall always have as far as human nature is concerned. and he said 65% is corporate crimes. Tax evasion and tax avoidance, which the transnational cooperations, or this 1% I always talk about that runs our world, have come to tell us that tax avoidance is legal and that tax evasion is the illegal one. Tax avoidance, they tell us you are just being clever about how you structure your profits so that you pay less tax. And I think for me, as an African feminist and as an African woman living in this continent, bearing the brunt of poverty and lack of social services, it doesn't matter if it's tax avoidance or tax evasion, and the previous speaker alluded to it actually. The effects on me are the same. But for as long as we have this 1% setting the economic rules, we are going to have illegality turned into legality. It's just like profit shifting, really. They are telling us that profit shifting is a clever way of structuring, especially for transnational corporations, because they have holding companies and they have subsidiaries. They're telling us a clever way of shifting your profits within so that you make sure that you maximize on your profit. And then they tell us, no, it is misinvoicing that is illegal. Again, the effects for me for profit shifting and misinvoicing as an African woman are the same. But the statistic that scared me actually is a GFI statistic, a global integrity, global financial integrity. I think they're based in New York or Washington. Very small team that does research on these things. They tell us that between 2004 and 2013, 83% of illicit financial flows from poor countries and developing world were actually from price misinvoicing. That's what they tell us is the illegal one. And they're telling us profit shifting is the legal one. If the statistic for the illegal one is this high, how much more is the statistic for the one they're telling us is legal, the profit shifting? I mean, you can make the maths yourself and realize that this is another form of colonization. I keep referring to the 1%. I think I just want to unpack them quickly. Again, it is a research that we are getting from GFI. They're telling us that the top richest 100 economies of the world are not countries. 51 of them are transnational cooperations. Within those transnational cooperations, there are 62 individuals who are either owners or shareholders in these transnational corporations. Those 62 people together own the wealth to the tune of trillions of US dollars. 62 individuals. Now, if 51 of the richest economies are transnational corporations, it begs the question, who really runs the world? So while we have the Beijing platform on one hand, and we are looking at 30 years, and we want to see the advances we have made in terms of illicit financial flows and tax justice, I just want to flag for us that governments are not really in control. United Nations agenda, it is then an AU agenda, it is an agenda of the EU, it is, I don't know what the Asian one is called, but they have one, all continents have a a continental governance body. Now, if this is a government agenda, but you have transnational corporations who command trillions of dollars, between the richest 100 economies, and there's 51 of them, which means they outweigh government. How are we going to advance this? Because neoliberalism in its nature is formed for the creation of profit. Remember that neoliberalism and Adam Smith's capitalism are two different, they don't talk to one another, by the way, for people who are not aware, they are diametrically opposite. Up to the Second World War, which ended in 1945, anybody who spoke, any economist who espoused neoliberalism was regarded as an anarchist. How dangerous neoliberalism is. But slowly, capital started buying economic schools, started buying government, started buying that one, paying that one, and by the time we blinked our eyes, neoliberalism was normalized as a way of economics. Now, if we want to talk tax for me, I don't want to talk corporate tax only, because I think the discussion thus far has been centering there. I don't know of any NGO that is prepared to scale down that discussion for me, to take it to personal tax, to take it to PSUN, because that is where women are having a role. I think for me, that's why then we need gender disaggregated data. I have coined something, and I hope I will make sense. I say we need gender disaggregated taxation again, because as long as pay as you earn is taxing work categories or it's taxing posts, it is not taxing a household. There's no human face. It is not taxing people. It allows a single woman, and we know we have more single women-led household, I think, than anywhere else in this continent. It allows a household led by a single woman who is looking after 4 children of her own, maybe 2 from her sister who's passed on, because that's how we are as women, looking after the grandparents and whoever. That woman is taxed the same as someone in the same post who is looking after 2 children. Because remember, in pay as you earn, we are taxing gross, not net. We don't want to know after we've taken a tax, what are your financial commitments? This is neoliberalism. And I don't know if we want to take the discussion there, because I think that's where the discussion needs to go. If we must achieve what the Beijing platform gave us as the 12 critical areas, we need to start looking at where at personal level are the outflows, where is the raw deal for women. How are we taxing a single woman who sits in a pay category with another woman who is married, where the partner might be even at a higher category and they have 2 incomes and this woman has 1 income? Or even if the partner of that woman is at a lower category, the bottom line, there are 2 incomes in that household. And sometimes when they're middle class, they're only looking after 2 children. And we are taxing that woman who is not middle class the same. And I say she's not middle class because after the deductions, the net, what she takes home is far less. So she's middle class by pay grade, but she's not middle class by net, by her commitments. It never makes sense to me. If you can give tax breaks to multinationals, why are tax breaks for single women? Considering that single women also do unpaid care work, they also do unpaid homework. It's another term I'm coining. For me, care work and homework are 2 different things. Homework is when I get home and I'm the one who cooks and I'm the one who helps the children with the homework and I'm the one who's sweeping and while the man is sitting there reading a newspaper because of patriarchy. So women are not only bogged down in unpaid care work, we are also bogged down in unpaid homework. It is funny how we have allowed the system to call schoolwork homework. No, that's schoolwork. It belongs to the school. It shouldn't even be coming home, by the way. But it is coming home, which means the woman has a double homework. That schoolwork that was not done at home, but the homework is in the actual homework. So if we look at all these things, and we say you are doing unpaid care work, you are doing unpaid homework, you are also the teacher, by the way. I don't know in your countries, but I know in South Africa, there is more teaching by parents now than by the schools, actually. And this includes even private schools. The amount of work sent home for parents to assist them is unthinkable for my generation, because my parents never participated in anything that I was doing at school, and my pass rate was 50%, and I still made it. If we consider that and we say those same women must still pay the same taxation as the men, as another woman who is in a relationship where there are 2 incomes, as a household, there's an income that the father and the 2 kids who are both middle class, compared to a household where there is just 1 income or 2 income and the mouths to feed are 10. So for me, if I look at the 12 critical areas of Beijing, really, women and poverty, the first one, we are not ending poverty if we are refusing to cascade the discussion about taxation. From multinationals, yes, they are impoverishing us because they are diminishing money that should be spent on services, which is why we then have this unpaid care work where women must fit in. But that is also exacerbated by how much we are giving to government. Because remember, when there's corporate tax evasion or avoidance, as I said, the effects are the same. When there is that, then falls on pay-as-you-earn. Governments then make more money from pay-as-you-earn. But when they make more money from pay-as-you-earn, it is the woman who suffers the brunt even more than the men. If we look at the critical area of education, training, and development, again, how are we going to ensure that the girl child who bears the brunt of this unpaid care work, of this unpaid homework? Girls don't come home in Africa and sit at the table and do their homework. They come home and they do help with the homework. They help the mother with the homework before they do the actual homework, which is actually schoolwork, which was brought home. So how are we going to bridge that gap when girls, for me, are still starting from A0 than from A1, like the boys? Women and health. How are we going to get the health and the sanity of women? You know, there's even a joke in South Africa. While the Beijing 12 critical areas dealt with women in decision-making and power, and our previous speakers say we are seeing emerge in middle near to executive positions. But we have a joke in South Africa that these women are successful, single, and frustrated, because we have not gone and addressed equity. We are so stuck on equality. Put them in this place, put them in this place. We want to see the statistics. We want to see, we don't have it in South Africa. We even have in some countries, women who become MPs because of the women vote or the gender vote. So we want to see them pop up. But what about the equity? When the Beijing platform happened 30+ years ago, it addressed equality, but it did not address equity, Africans, because equity is the conditions that led to this inequality. I know we think because it talked of health, economy, environment, law, human rights, armed conflict, peace and security, environment, we think because it touched on those areas, it was touching on equity. No, it was not. Because it is patriarchy single-handedly that has kept women behind, if we put the economics aside, because the economics are then just the cherry on top. In Africa, it is patriarchy that has locked us out of the economy. Where pre-colonially, we were the economists because we were the agriculturalists, and because we were the agriculturalists, we commanded the markets. That's why it's still predominantly commanded by women in Africa, and we call it an informal sector. Another area we need to put binoculars on, and we need to transform it and bring it to par and stop calling it an informal sector, because that's what's feeding us, by the way. So because of that, we controlled the markets, and because we controlled the markets, we controlled the seeds, and because of that, we controlled health. Now, if we don't return women to this part of what they controlled before, we are not going to implement the recommendations of the Beijing platform, these 12 critical areas, because patriarchy then came through the cash crop and put the women aside, and not just aside, but even locked us out of the economy. So when we look at these things, and I remind us again, we are dealing with an agenda that is United Nations, it's global. This agenda is not going to cascade down. And for an Afrofeminist, say, we need to look at unpaid pay work, we need to look at gender equity and equality in the economy, we need to look at the social environment, we need to look at the intersectionality of being locked out, we need to look at decolonial economic thinking, we need to look at reparations. It will not cascade, it's a global agenda. What we've suffered as Africans is not the same as other continents have suffered. So it tells me then that this agenda is supposed to be cascading down at the AU level. This is what we need to be pushing to make sure that we restore the African woman to
Honorable
the
Tshabalala, you have
Yes.
2 minutes.
Thank you. To restore the African woman to the equity where she was pre-colonially. I'm actually, this is my last point, pre-colonially, because if we don't do that, and we look at tax, and we look at illicit financial flows, as a hanging pie, as if it does not have tentacles behind. And those tentacles are not just economic for me, they also are cultural, but I call it the bastardized African culture, which espouses patriarchy, which continues to lock us out. So unless we address that, I think we will be 30 years from now, we will say 60 years Beijing, where have we traversed in terms of economic justice as Afro-feminists? Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think I'll leave it here.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tshabalala, for that very insightful presentation. One of the things that we've taken note of is the need for the intersectional approach that takes, that recognizes the different needs, but also looks into the different characteristics of women and other marginalized groups while defining tax systems. And you also talked a lot about unpaid care work, which you also termed as homework. And now I'll quickly move to Tendai, who will be speaking about care work and why it is undervalued in existing economic and tax policies and how they can be leveraged to recognize, reduce, redistribute, reclaim, reward, remunerate, and represent care work and care workers, and how austerity measures and tax cuts for the wealthy have continued to impact the availability of quality gender transformative public services. Tendai, over to you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for even having a platform like this one where we could have conversations like this, of course, that we have been having for a while now, but conversations that are still very relevant. I'm going to keep my video off as well because I noticed that if I turn it on, my network will lag just a bit. So lucky for me, Honorable Tshabalala and Azeezat touched on unpaid care work when they were speaking about their different issues. And that is because ultimately at the center of these conversations, we find that we're still having conversations around unpaid care work or paid but undervalued care work. So just to start it off, I think it's important, like we have agreed up to a certain point, that care work, whether it's paid or unpaid, is very essential for our society to function. And it is shocking that it still continues to be undervalued in our economic and tax policies. And we can skate around why the issue is so, and there's so many other issues. But ultimately, some of the main reasons are because of our deeply embedded patriarchal, neoliberal, and capitalist structures. These structures fail to recognize the contribution that care work has towards our economies, that care work has even in our societies. Now, you will find that patriarchy and capitalism work hand in hand. They're like these twins that go hand in hand. One thrives off of the other and vice versa. And so we have seen, like was mentioned by the previous speakers, how the nature of care work itself has been very gendered. Care work like child care, elder care. I like that Honorable Tshabalala spoke about actual homework and homework as well. So you see, like, child care will now extend to even work, schoolwork, and all of that, domestic labor. All of this work has primarily been performed by women and other marginalized groups, and it has continued to reinforce the idea that it is a natural responsibility rather than a form of labor. And you will find that it is funny that years back, the slogan was that a woman's place is in the kitchen and cooking is a natural responsibility of a woman. And after a few years, when cooking became a highly paid job, when chefs and executive chefs and people who started charging for their work, which was cooking, was highly paid, somehow after a few years, cooking has become a male-dominated sector. You will find a lot of men in that sector because it is now paying very well. So it's also a conversation around just sitting down and actually realizing that the patriarchy and also these capitalist structures keep reinforcing different narratives to suit how it is going to keep the world turning. And another thing to note is that traditional economic models have claimed to fail to account for unpaid care work, which of course, when we look at it, is not true. We have had of course, some studies done. I know there's a study that was done in Oxfam by Kenya, in Kenya by Oxfam, that found that women's unpaid labor in care work was contributing approximately 12 billion in US dollars annually, but yet it was still remaining unrecognized in official economic indicators. Another thing to note is that there was a study that was done by the World Economic Forum, which was saying that if it was valued, unpaid care work would account for 9 to 16% of global GDP. Now, this would make it one of the largest economic sectors. So now you beg to ask questions like, why is it still not being considered as the very essence or the very base of our economic models? When you look at a country like Zambia, over the last 12 months or more, we have been going through an energy crisis. So we have a country that is going through 20 hours plus of load management. We have some places that will even go as much as 2 days without any electricity. Now, of course, this has had some economic hindrances. Of course, it has hit our economy. But what is important to note is that life has generally continued as usual, in that these companies are still working the same. I have not seen any corporations adjust the reporting time for people, and that is mainly because women have continued to bear the brunt of unpaid care work, but it has only doubled for them. So ideally, a woman who would essentially wake up at 6 to do her care work or her homework, make sure that the children are bathed and ready to go for school, make sure that the partners are bathed and have eaten and are ready to go for work, will now have to just adjust her time. And instead of doing it at 6, will now ideally start to do it at 4 o'clock. So what we see happening is that the economy will continue to move, the capitalists will continue to win, the corporations will continue to put in the same hours of work, but the people who are providing the unpaid care work are now doing it at double or 3 times the load. And this essentially is what is keeping a country's economy still running. Because if this type of work, or if this type of work that they're providing was paid, you would then see that because they are putting in 3 or 4 more hours, they would ideally need to get paid more, as it is in the workplace. If they are performing overtime, they would get more money, and ideally it would help. So now what it just does is the woman will put in more work than usual at home, which is unpaid, unrecognized, and undervalued, and then still leave at the same time that she would leave when we didn't have the energy crisis, and still go and put in work at her quote unquote formal job, so to say. So you see that this sort of work, even when it is tangible and even when people are seeing it in a situation like what we have in Zambia, will still decide to look the other way because it is not productive. As it is termed, and I'm saying this with air quotes. Another thing is that, of course, and I've spoken about it, is that our capitalist and neoliberal economic policies like to emphasize profit-making and market-driven solutions. And Azeezat spoke to this and spoke about how the value is on productive work. And you now see the heavy privatization of public services that ideally will continue to shift the burden of care to families and to women, of course, and young women without compensation. An example is that when our public hospitals are underfunded, automatically, there's no conversations, but automatically women begin to fill the gap by providing more home-based healthcare for relatives. Women will take time off from work, unpaid time off from work, and start to volunteer and provide this sort of work for their relatives. Another thing that we'll see as to why it continues to be undervalued is that tax systems continue to favor corporations over social investment. And that is just the truth. Honorable Tshabalala is just from speaking about it. You will see that corporates have low tax rates. Meanwhile, we continue to have higher indirect taxes every day on goods, every day on things that we cannot help but use. Meanwhile, corporate tax rates continue to go lower. And if it were the other case, in cases where you say, let's increase the corporate tax rates and let's reduce indirect taxing, you would see that, of course, people would now be in a space to now be able to afford to live a life that is going to allow them to get extra help, a life that is going to allow me to get someone to come in and I'm going to be able to pay them a wage that is going to be fair in order for them to take the burden off of me. Of course, we can speak about our GDP bias, how care work is still not considered productive. We have been having these conversations over the last few years, and we're now having a conversation after 30 years of Beijing talking about how GDP measures only market-based economic activities. I gave the example of how care work is literally holding up our economy, how care work is literally ensuring that the capitalistic system that we live in continues to turn and the wheels keep turning and the lights keep going on. But it is important also that we speak about what we need to do. And I like that this conversation has already begun. I like that we are already speaking about what we need to do these things. It's important that even as we speak about valuing care work, that as we speak about putting a figure towards care work, we realize that we need to ensure that people who are providing care work, especially in the formal, and I'm saying formal in air quotes, in the formal sector, are protected and are included in tax policies, in budget decisions. It's important that we ensure that these people are recognized and they are safe, because I think it's where we can begin to sort of begin to put value on the basis of care work as it is. Even if we put a figure, even if we put amount to care work, if the people who are working around care work still continue to work under conditions that are not secure, so to say, conditions that are not safe, we're generally sending a message that we do not value care work. And we're only going to continue putting figures, and we're only going to continue producing statistics around care work per se. And just to wrap this up, because I see that my time is running out, some of the harms that austerity measures have on care work, on women and care work, are around, of course, public sector cuts. We begin to see that when public sector spending is cut, when, for example, we start having wage freezes and job freezes, you begin to see that the burden will still fall on people who are providing care work at home. The burden will still fall on women. When governments cut funding for social services, women will begin to absorb the cap through unpaid care work. It will continue to deepen our gender inequality. Another thing is that with lower wages and job losses in these public sectors, we have seen that women are overrepresented in public sector jobs. You have a lot of women who are nurses, who are teachers, social workers, and most of the times austerity-driven wage freezes and layoffs disproportionately affect them. So we're going to see that more women are going to be affected in those areas, because those are the areas that typically our government will apply austerity measures. Another thing is around deterioration of care infrastructure. Austerity measures result in fewer public services. So where we should be having conversations around the government needs to provide more public daycare centers or better and effective elderly care, you begin to see that even the countries or even the places that already had these services will begin to cut them, which is going to essentially lead to lower quality of these services. And it will still then overburden our systems and will force women to still step up and provide all of that. Another thing the tax cuts for the wealthy and for these corporate entities does is that...
1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you. Is that we begin to see still more a loss of revenue. And Honorable Tshabalala had spoken about some of these evasions and all of that, which is a loss of revenue. But then you begin to see that even around, in air quotes, the legal taxation for these corporates and also for wealthy people, all we are seeing is loss of revenue that could otherwise benefit our public services. When corporations and the outreach avoid taxes, government will have to compensate by raising regressive consumption taxes. You begin to see VAT going up, you begin to see fuel levies, you begin to see that the shift of the burden will still continue to fall on low-income women. Another thing that we'll see is that our social protections continue to weaken. Tax cuts will reduce state capacity to invest in things like pension, to invest in things like longer parental leave as well, and also disability benefits. It will still leave marginalized groups even more vulnerable. And I think, okay, thank you, Grace. I'm going to end it just here because I see my 1 minute is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tendai. I see our time is fast spent, but I'd like to request that we have 10 more minutes, please, just to have some questions or comments from the audience. Anyone who has a comment or question, you can raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any hands, but there were some questions in the chat, and so I'll invite the speakers if we still giving it another shot at questions or comments. Okay, none. Oh, I see one hand. Yes, Risasi. Okay, so I'll have Risasi and Michael. Please use 1 minute, please.
Very much, Grace, and the panelists, thank you very much for the beautiful insight. I am interested as we're taking the stock after 30 years of the Beijing Treaty. I'm just wondering whether we have been interested in also finding out what contributions as women we have played into delaying or pushing back the gender equality and equity. Because for sure, I know there is women who have also tended to be gatekeepers. So I am interested in seeing both of the coins because it's basically one coin. The other coin, women are playing parts. The other coin, there is patriarchy and other issues that affect gender equality. So I'm interested in knowing the other coin of the part where women we have contributed to our setback.
Thank you, Risasi. Gloria?
Thank you. I think mine's just a comment. I joined late in the middle of Dr. Litchfield-Tshabalala's presentation. And I think one thing that stood out for me is indeed, we need to think about ways where we tax wealth and not work, because I think those disparities in that, okay, fine, maybe we have the same earning level, but due to the responsibilities that we have in our homes and in our families, there are just so many disparities that can't just be focused on necessarily okay, strictly looking at work, but also look at how that work or that earnings also affect our wealth. And there was a question in the chat that I was thinking on or reflecting on about what concrete actions would you encourage to pursue the feminist agenda in the field of taxation. I don't know if this would be progressive or regressive, but I know that there are examples of maybe certain countries putting in tax breaks. Maybe you can consider advocating for particular tax breaks for women, especially single women who have registered dependents, as a way of, easing the financial burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Michael?
Very well, and congratulations to the speakers. They have done a good job, except to say that I think that as we talk about 30 years after Beijing, one area or a couple of areas that we haven't hit enough is the issue of gender value education, where we have done institutional reforms. We've passed laws that recognizes. We have ministries that of gender and so on. But what is the level of education just to change mindset, just to help people to appreciate the fact that gender equality is what is needed to increase development. The other thing that we all the gender advocates are not doing enough is that I don't see our debate, our advocacy going into laws, gender sensitive laws. You have policies that are, for most of the policies that are passed, are gender neutral. So I give a typical example. If I use the electronic taxation, that is the in thing in Africa these days because of the rising mobile telephony and mobile money transfer. You would notice that most of these transfers are going into caregivers, women in informal sectors. Taxation putting on mobile transfer is costing women and caregivers a lot more than it is costing other people in the or is disproportionately affecting women. Finally, corruption. Corruption is creating discrimination within in gender. That corruption is hurting women a lot more, but our focus been on building institutions and laws, and I think it's about time that we refocus on discriminatory corruption, gender sensitive laws, and also gender value education. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll also go over some of the questions that were shared in the comments and questions. I think you've spoken about this one, Michael, about advocacy and championing gender sensitive laws. And then there was also a question from Eugene about what the panelists think is the difference between equality and equity in taxation, and then another on concrete actions that you would encourage to pursue the feminist agenda in the field of taxation. So, and then there was also a comment from Harriet Akelo on the need for the UN to conduct an assessment of technology, which women use to perform care work and set a limit to tax them. So I'll quickly go back to the panelists and ask them to respond to the questions. And while responding, also share, I know some of this has been shared, but share about how feminist movements can collaborate with tax justice advocates to push for fairer tax systems at national, regional, and global levels. And so please respond to the questions, and then your parting shots as well. You can use 3 minutes each. Thank you. I'll start with Azeezat.
Thank you so much, Grace. Well, I also want to be sure, did we capture Gloria's question? I just wanted to be sure. I didn't hear a question particularly, so I just wanted to be sure that we captured it.
I captured it. I did capture it,
Okay.
Azeezat.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tshabalala. Yes, so I think the question that Gloria was asking, if I'm correct, is that what kind of role are women also played in pushing back against gender inequality, if I'm right, if I'm very, very correct. I think that was what I heard. So just wanted to be sure that that's the question that she asked before I proceed. Hi, Gloria, was that your question?
That wasn't from me.
That wasn't Gloria.
Okay. But was there a question like that? I think I heard it. Just wanted to be sure again.
Yes, you did hear it. It was the first question.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Doctor. Okay. Yes. So I think that I would pick that and then answer the other question in 3 minutes, like we said. So while I was speaking, I spoke about the current issue going on at the Nigeria's National Assembly, where a senator had accused the Senate president of sexual harassment. And when she was accused of sexual harassment, she accused the Senate president of sexual harassment, and she raised a petition to that effect. She went to court, did so many things to ensure that justice is heard. She went to the Interparliamentary Union at the United Nations. If you just type that thing on Google, everywhere is just blazing fire. But the most bizarre thing about it is that the people who were like first responders to that case. Now, for context, Nigeria has a National Assembly that has 109 members. And out of those 109 members, we have just 4 women in that assembly. And that means that for every 1 woman that you see, there are like 26 other men. That's the ratio of men to women at the National Assembly. Now, those 3 other women, even before the case was, brought to the fore of the Ethics and Disciplinary Committee, they went to the media. They were granting interviews that, women shouldn't be doing this. If women are doing this, then they won't put them in position of power. They won't trust them with power. We feel like it's something that it is too sacred. Things like that should not be spoken out. These were women who were leading this. I mean, these were like our fellow senators who were going to the media to say all of those things. And if you look at it critically, that's insane. Now, not only were women like at the forefront of leading those treacherous campaigns, I call them treacherous campaign, but also we also have women who are from a constituency in Kogi State who were leading the charge to recall her, from the Senate, that, it's a woman who is leading a recall. It's a woman who led the petition for them to recall her from the Senate, that, 6 months suspension is not enough for Senator Natasha, but we have to recall her from the Senate. She's disgracing women. Now, I look at this and I say that these are like active steps. When patriarchy wants to fight, when people in position of power want to fight, when racist ideologies want to move, they look for somebody who looks like you to fight their battles. So when a white person wants to cheat a black person, they look for a black person to lead the charge. So I think this is majorly caused by internalized patriarchy, because men have done terrible things. And in this case, she is the victim. There's so many terrible things that men have done. I'm talking of like the Nigerian Senate. A senator was once caught in a sex shop he was assaulting the store owner, the storekeeper, and they use all of these kind of things to push the agenda that women are too emotional, they can't be put in power. So it's more of internalized patriarchy, internalized misogyny that, makes them want to say all of those things. So I also think it's just like the kind of power system that occurs, that they feel like, this is the structure of the world, and we putting you in a position of power is a privilege. You are not even supposed to be here. So it's like we are doing you a favor. So these are like steps. When you look at the people who are championing, we should not, abortion should be legislated upon. I mean, people should not have, you are not the person who is, carrying out an abortion. Men should not be legislating over women's bodies, because there are no laws that actually legislate on men's bodies. So it's more about control, and that control is internalized. So these are like those steps that, patriarchy uses women to also, push the agenda of, gender inequality. So I would take that. For feminist movement, we know that it's like currently
Azeezat,
now, I don't want
sorry, I need to cut you short.
hi.
I'm sorry,
Okay,
I need
let
to
me
cut
just
you
wrap
short.
up. So feminist. Okay, wait, I'm done. Okay, let me just add this one sentence. For
That's
us
fine.
as
That's
feminist
fine.
movement. Okay, I think that we are working on thin ice at this time. Lots of things are happening globally. The funding cuts, the global gag-grow, religious extremism, so many things happening around the world at this time. And this is a time for us to come together more than before. We can't just afford to keep quiet. Just like as we are making this conversation, we continue talking about it, and we continue to take actions in our own communities. We support community organizers. If you're working on, issues like this, support community organizers, support grassroots movements. Let us continue to do the work. Our rights cannot be taken away from us. We fought so hard to get here, and we can't just stop here. So I think I'll stop that and let the other panelists take the other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Khanyisile, please use 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm taking gender-sensitive lens to policies, gender value education, the questions that Michael was posing, women participating in delaying the Beijing recommendations. It is 1,500 years of patriarchy in Africa since 639, when Islam arrived on this soil, and about 9 centuries later, Christianity arrived. Now, I'm not attacking religion, but I am also not a person who calls a spade an instrument used to dig the garden. It is a spade, it has a name. Until we address the patriarchy that is in religion, we are going to participate as women. To the person who asked the question, have women participated? Yes, we've participated in delaying the agenda in one way or the other, because we believe in patriarchy, because patriarchy is systemic, because patriarchy is structural. Patriarchy is in the belief system that we are stuck in, that we go every Thursday and Friday and Sunday, to espouse, because it says the man is the head of the house, something that never existed pre-colonially. So for me, until we address what we call traditional laws in Africa, which are actually not traditional laws because it's bastardized African culture, we will find that women participate to uphold neoliberalism and neocolonialism, because by nature we are the cultural beacons. Pre-colonially, we're the cultural beacons. So when the culture changes and it becomes bastardized, we will continue to be the upholders, albeit negative upholders now. And Michael, until we decolonize, we are not going to have those gender-sensitive laws that we are asking us to have. It will end up as statutes. See, the official salute in India, in the Defense Force, is Jai Hindi. They are saluting their Hindu gods. So whether you're Muslim or Christian or however, this is India. They tell you we are Hindu. We haven't done that. We haven't gone through a cultural revolution in Africa for us to define who we are outside of neoliberalism and neocolonialism. And I must actually take my hat off for FEMNET, for Akina Mama, and for Action Aid for at least having hosted about 2 months ago a workshop where we dared to look at a post-Afro-feminist neoliberal society. Those are exercises we need to be doing. And just quickly, Grace, I know you gave me 2 minutes. The way forward, Grace, I agree with you. I'll take it further. Instead of just saying tax breaks for single women, I would say we need to humanize personal tax, or pay as you earn, as it is called in many countries. We need to put a face to it, and we need to disaggregate it from taxing a post or a tax bracket, because there's a human face behind that tax bracket, and it is the woman who suffers the brunt of it. That's why we need gender disaggregated data, specifically on personal tax, because it is going to show us what a raw deal we have given to women. But how our pay-as-you-earn tax is structured is exactly how corporate tax is structured. It is structured so that it feeds the gaps that corporate tax leaves behind. So for me, those are the agendas. And the very last one is that while it is still in its nascent stages, we need to put a gender transformative foundation, lens, and provisions to the United Nations Tax Convention, so that we don't sit 30 years after, as we're doing with the Beijing, and we say 30 years after, what have we achieved with the United Nations Tax Convention? We need to act now and make sure, and I know that work is already ongoing, by the way, but we need to support our feminist organizations that are putting that gender lens to the United Nations Tax Convention. And yeah, the struggle for decolonization is on. Let us all, it is our struggle. all of us. It doesn't belong to an organization, an individual. We all need to decolonize. I think India is shaming us on that perspective. We can learn a lot from them. Thank you once again to the people who tuned in, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Tshabalala. Tendai, over to you. 2 minutes, please.
I was going to say I'm going to try and wrap this up in a minute. Thank you. So just to add on to what Doc and Azeezat have already said, the one thing to realize about how the patriarchy works or how the systems are set up is that even with women, the only thing that women are afforded is privilege and not power. And so we'll find that women, in trying to survive and in trying to get ahead and just thrive, will take on any form of privilege that they can get because they know that they're not afforded the power to actually thrive on their own without the system. So that is something that is important for us to note, even as we look at how we are reinforcing some of these systems and how there are women who are still delaying some of the strides that we're trying to make. And with regards to how we can contribute to add on to what has already been said in making tax, in putting a human face to tax, it is important that we continue to support community-led feminist movements and community-led activist movements that are championing the cause of actual tax justice, because we need to realize that they're in touch with the community. And for us to have an uproar and for us to have a revolution, we need to involve the communities that we work with. It is not enough to just speak about what is going on and what is wrong. We also need to take a deliberate step in watering down the language into a language that the communities that we serve are going to understand. For a revolution to take place, people need to actually see it. And some of the first steps are like what Dr. Tshabalala spoke about with regards to the disaggregated data. We actually see the figure and see how we are bearing the brand still in unfair taxes. We can now begin to water down the language and bring it to community level and start a revolution, basically. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in.
Thank you for that, and thank you to all the panelists as well. I'd now like to close the meeting. This is one of many, and we hope to have very many more of these discussions. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.